Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today. This is one of the many webinars we do where we look at some of the big issues that confront us all. And in today's webinar, we're going to look at how art can be used, art and entertainment, to help us through times when we all face crisis in our life. And of course, today, we're facing the crisis of COVID-19. And that's not just a crisis of getting the illness, and that is bad enough, but it's a crisis of fear and anxiety that's caused by that. And that's something that's affecting many, many people right across the globe. And many people believe that that fear and anxiety can lead to despair and mental illness. And we know that as a result of the fear and also social isolation and loneliness, people are beginning to feel desperate and also feeling that they're suffering some degree of mental illness. Well, how can we then provide some hope and inspiration during this time? What sort of way can we help people get through this crisis? Well, the World Health Organization is particularly interested in what is happening today because they know that the coronavirus emergency is causing problems for many people's mental health. And so what they are hoping, and we have Lena Russell with us today, who is working with them as a consultant, what they're hoping is that we can use art and entertainment to try and look at how we can improve people's health and engage them and give them hope. And Lisa, I'm glad she's with us today. She's not only a consultant for the World Health Organization, she's also an Emmy-winning filmmaker. And she's particularly interested in the intersection that there is between art, social justice, and global development. And as I said, it's great that she can join us today. Now, this interview is part of a series that we're doing called Conversations Across Borders. And Marina Finetto from Trace's Dreams is helping us with this. She's developed the project with us in GlobalNet 21, and she helps me develop the interviews, and she will be doing that with us today. So I'm glad she's here as well. Anyhow, let's get started and begin the interview. And the first thing we asked Lisa was, something about her background and the work that she does.
I have a master's in public health, and I took a very non-traditional career path with my MPH where I pursued a career as a filmmaker. So I work as a filmmaker and an arts curator, and I still focus on global health and development stories and projects. So I like to say I'm multilingual. I speak UN talk and I speak artist talk. And I translate the two, and I try to straddle both worlds and figure out how to bring them together. Because I feel that both worlds do incredible work. They just speak different languages, have a different culture in how they execute their work, but they can be and should be incredible partners to help solve some of our world's challenges.
Okay, Maria?
You are a consultant for the World Health Organization. What does this involve? What does it mean in concrete?
So I was supposed to speak at a conference in London, the ISNTD Arts and NTD Festival in London. And this is when things started to get really hectic with the temperature scans and the traveling. And so I really wanted to go. I was in the opening panel with some amazing people, including Chris Bailey, who's with WHO. He's the lead of the arts and health. A filmmaker with the MTV Staying Alive Foundation. She decides where I'm a global champion, and I was really looking forward to it, but I got worried that I would get stuck. So last minute, I basically said, let me just stay here, see how things pan out. I'm in Mombasa, Kenya right now. And I'm happy I did, but I still Skyped in. I did my presentation from afar. And then Chris Bailey and I just hit it off, and we had numerous conversations, spoke for hours. We kind of have the same philosophy in terms of how to responsibly engage artists. And that turned into an opportunity for me to come on board and help develop a project called Solidarity Shows, which is really highlighting the involvement and the talent and the efforts of grassroots artists. So they're doing the big celebrity shows with Global Citizen, and there's John Legend, Lady Gaga. but I'm really focused on sort of the artists who are working artists, who are on the ground, who have an incredible impact on people on a daily basis, and really trying to engage with them. And we have over 500 artists who are engaged, and they come from all regions and all genres, and it's really amazing.
Okay, we'll talk about your Solidarity project a little later as well, because that's really, really good. But some people would think it really strange that an organization like the World Health Organization is interested in art. Can you explain why they are?
Yeah, this is an exciting time for me, because for 15 years, I've been like, we need to engage artists and storytellers in the work of the MDGs, you know, previous to the SDGs, and in global health in general. And I think that for a long time, that's been seen as sort of a little on the fluffy side, like, oh, artists want to change the world, and isn't this great? And they sing songs and make films. But the reality is that artists are incredible creative thinkers. I like to say that if you can survive as a working artist, especially in New York City where I live, you've got to be incredible in your problem solving and creative thinking. So why wouldn't you want artists sitting at a, sitting at a seat with a bunch of policymakers talking about solutions to world problems? So I think with time, and as research has come out and that has been showing that there's a rise in what people call the creative class, that it's one of the world's fastest growing economies, that they contribute a lot to the economics of the world. They, help change narratives. They are, even with this COVID-19 pandemic, they were some of the ones who were the first ones to show up. They're the ones singing from balconies. They're the ones, doing DJ live sets on Instagram. People are referring to movies, watching Netflix. Like, most people who are stuck at home are going towards the arts as a way to, heal from what's going on, as a way to learn about what's going on. So they're incredibly important partners. I think just they haven't been recognized. So WHO is actually smart in giving a theater professional the title of a lead of arts and health at the WHO. And they released, I forget the name of the title of the report, but they released a document last year that looks at the role of arts in the overall well-being of populations around the world.
Yes, this is, you just mentioned these people singing from the balconies. So it was, I am Italian, and it was, it really touched me. As I am based in Sweden, but I followed, of course, the situation in Italy, and really touched me seeing how people started really going back to the to our roots. Let's say singing the national hymns, for example. This is something that we do not do regularly, and this is the question: what is really the role of art in moments like this, and why do we see people really trying to find the stories or the narratives that we need, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I just feel in general, so artists, in my point of view, have a lot of responsibilities. So one, they can be messengers of important information. Back in the days of the TB, it was really interesting because public health officials were actually criticizing the poor for helping to spread TB. And so what resulted was that the poor revolted against the public health messaging. It was sort of like, they became like, well, you're accusing us of perpetuating this condition. Therefore, we're not going to obey any of the policies or rules that you're instigating, that then would lead to, the spread of TB. So what happened instead is that all these kind of artists interpreted TB. A lot of high profile, dignified artists were doing plays, writing things, you know what I mean? And so it became sort of an artist, I forget the term that they used, but it was like a disease that artists really rallied around. And that's one thing, that artists can be messengers of information, important information, that maybe policymakers or scientists aren't good at communicating to a wider audience. They can also help document sort of the historical context of what's going on. In 10 years, 15 years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, this was just an unbelievable time in our history. And look how it's been interpreted by the creative community. So it's not just going to be reports or news or whatnot. It's going to be visuals. It's going to be songs. It's going to be poetry. And it's going to help define this moment in the future. And then, you know, lastly, I think it's absolutely a healing mechanism, whether you partake in an arts activity, if you're painting, if you're drawing, like you're saying, if you're singing. I think it's a healing mechanism, and also a way for, you know, artists can help lead sort of the cultural responses to crises. In my Brooklyn, New York world, hip hop is very big. And so a lot of the hip hop artists, for example, are coming out and doing like live DJ shows and rallying like hundreds of thousands of people to come together as a community and, you know, try to get through this thing. So there's a lot of angles that I think artists and creatives are important in terms of dealing with this crisis and helping the masses deal with this crisis. Yeah.
But in the situation we're now with COVID-19 and coronavirus emergency, I understand what you're saying about art, you know, documenting history, bringing people together. But what can it especially do in the crisis we're in now? Can it give inspiration? Can it give hope? Can it also give despair?
Yeah, I mean, you know, art is not messaging, right? Art is interpreting whatever the particular artist is going through or sees in something. So some of the artwork that we're getting in the initiative that I'll talk about later is not always positive and hopeful. It is documenting a reality of somebody, for example, who's living with Lyme disease, who's terrified of getting coronavirus or COVID-19 because of the implications that will have with somebody who's already has a compromised immune system. We have people who, you know, are political. People are coming back and you know, challenging governments through their art. So hope is one thing, but it's also, it's different than messaging. We can use art to relay important information about hand washing, about social distancing, but it's also just a pure reflection of whatever an individual artist is going through. And I think that's important. I definitely think that's important.
So in a way it gives perspective.
Yeah, definitely. It gives perspective. It's individual, I think, right? Like there's some calls for art that is focused specifically on public health messaging. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to congregate artists who are interpreting what they're going through different art forms, different art mediums, which has been really interesting and insightful. And, you know, you look at the art that's coming out of Italy and you look at the art that's coming out of South Africa, New York, and how that's evolving. And in places, you know, I'm in Kenya where it hasn't been hit that hard, and what the art looks like here. So it's an interesting, you know, entry into people's perceptions of what they are going through in their own personal lives. Because some of the strongest art is really personal, right?
This is, as I just mentioned, I was really touched seeing what was going on in Italy. And I wrote, for example, that what I believe is that these are the stories that we are going to share after the crisis. But at the same time, there were people who were working at the hospitals, for example, they started criticizing the people in Italy singing and telling them, stop it, there are people who are dying. So what I am asking you, how can we do this kind of really difference between that celebrating art, celebrating the stories that we need, but respecting or embracing the reality in which we live in?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think that's a really ignorant point of view. I think that if your way is the only way to deal with the crises, then that's not the reality of people who are outside of your bubble or your circle or what you're going through. Just because you sing or paint or even tell a joke doesn't mean that you are dismissing what healthcare workers are going through. Comedy is a great medium for people to process and to relieve themselves of the weight of this. If we were just all focused on the illness and the death and the dying, and there was no release from it, there's no, like, that's gonna, like, affect your mental health. That can lead to depression. So I think we need all of it. I don't think one is right. I think we need a variety of coping skills, a variety of perspectives. And it actually really bothers me when people think that just because you work as an artist, that you underestimate the important work of somebody like healthcare workers. Artists are some of the hardest hit people from this pandemic in terms of finances. They work a lot in the gig economy. They're suffering to feed families, to do whatever. There are people who have salaried positions, for example, who do not understand how dire it is. But yet again, the artists are the ones who showed up first. They weren't looking to get paid to go sing on balconies. They weren't looking to get paid to create visual art. This is their way of contributing to this crisis. And I think we can't diminish that.
So do you think that when artists do that, in a way, that they're doing all the things you say, and many unpaid as well, do you think they have a sort of sense of responsibility that at this time, at this moment, they're important, they can make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I think artists know their worth. Artists know the sacrifices that they do to do the things that are important to them, to do what they care about. I think society doesn't always understand or appreciate what artists do in times of crises, in times of whatnot. If you look at the history of like social movements, for example, throughout, in the US, for example, artists have been so instrumental in the HIV/AIDS movement, in the anti-smoking movement, in gay marriage movements, in even nominating Obama. Artists have played a central role. So artists, I think, understand their value. It's society that doesn't, and industries that don't, sectors that don't. I challenged an assistant secretary general at the UN one time because he was like, everybody, all sectors need to get on board and support the SDGs. We need academics, we need private sector, we need member states. And I was like, and what about the creatives? What about artists? And he's like, you're right. And so I worked with him on producing a film to engage artists in the SDGs. But the global health community, if they opened their, vision and really tried to understand and appreciate the value of arts, not just for entertainment, but again, for creative thinking, for healing, for changing narratives, I think they would realize that we're a lot more important than they give us credit for.
And Lisa, and now that you just mentioned at the beginning, you are launching the Solidarity Session and Solidarity Shows. Could you tell us more about this?
Sure. So my initiative, which is called Create 2030, is overseeing the Solidarity Shows component. Solidarity Sessions is WHO with Global Citizen and is primarily focused on like celebrities and celebrity musicians. And they're doing these big shows, they're getting broadcasts, reaching sort of a large number of people through traditional mainstream, whatever. Solidarity Shows is reaching out to the painter from Uganda who has painted a beautiful painting, who is an important voice in his community, but he's not a mega superstar. He's still valuable. And so his contribution is being recognized. And I think, what we're trying to do is really say, well, how can we turn this initiative into something that not only showcases this incredible artwork, and we have incredible artwork that's coming in from all over the place, all countries, not all countries, I'm sorry, a lot of different countries. And it's really creating a community in this group that we're building. But likewise, how can we as a global health community support artists who are making a contribution? Could we license their artwork for our website? Could we purchase their artwork for our offices after this crisis is done? Is there a way that we could do, an art auction and help sell their content to help feed their family? Artists shouldn't be asked to work for free, and we shouldn't be asked to work for exposure. And I understand sometimes, it's helpful that we get, my work gets recognized at the UN, but it can't be the culture. And so I think if we see each other as partners or collaborators and helping one another, we can elevate both how artists are welcomed into the development space, but also how they can share the messages and the work of UN NGO agencies that sometimes don't get outside their bubble.
Yeah, go on, Marina, sorry.
No, sorry, but what do you do exactly with these solidarity shows?
So what we decided to do is in order to protect artists' intellectual property rights, the first point of entry into the project is through a private Facebook group. Artists can join it, allies can join it, people who just want to see the artwork can join it, but there is a condition if you join the group that you don't share artwork without the permission of the artist. There's a website that is housing both the solidarity sessions, which again is more celebrity folks, and then with that, the solidarity shows that is focused more on the community grassroots artists who are very powerful. Some of them are celebrities in their own countries, but may not be, you know, at the international stage that some of the solidarity sessions are. So it's evolving. This has been, you know, as the pandemic evolves and as we see what's happening, we're sort of also trying to figure out how to evolve this project. But for right now, I know I check it every day and other artists are checking it every day. They're showing support to other artists. We're talking about, you know, how do you process, what's your new work, you know, your routine when you go to work. You know, for me, for example, I'm in another country. I'm not working as I normally do. So people are sharing. It's good. It's like a really, it's small, but it's becoming a really like strong community of artists, which I enjoy.
But when you do this, you're not doing it solely on your own, are you? You're working with groups like Global Citizens, is that right? I mean, who are they?
I'm not. I don't personally like working with celebrities, so they're good at that, so they can go do that. There's so much that needs to be done in terms of the larger creative community that's where I choose to put my focus and where I'm good at, to be honest.
So so rather than work with them, you have a site, don't you, called Create 2030. Is that where you sort of have every piece of artistic work placed? Is that your sort of, you know, focal point for everything you do?
So that's, I mean, over the last 15 years, I've had a lot of different creative projects. I've had my mdg5.com, which was uniting artists and activists around maternal health. I've had the Woman Tour, where I jumped on a tour bus with a musician and went around the country for 3 weeks talking about obstetric fistula, showing films and doing music. I've done I Sell the Shadow, which evolved into Create 2030, now for the SDGs. So it's a culmination of sort of all of my work that I've done since beginning my film career, because I've always been working with different artists. And because it's evolved, it's sort of, you know, taken different shapes and forms. But right now, it's really trying to engage artists in not just the COVID-19 response, but in the wider, you know, SDG movement. So we do performances, we do workshops, we've done Artify Your Mission projects. We've done a lot of different things, but
it sounds from what you're saying that you're almost a negotiator, a moderator between artists and, say, the WHO. And I think that WHO talks about reaching out to art influencers. So is that what you would call yourself, an art influencer?
well, to me, influencers are like people that have millions of followers. And we talked personally where I was like, I don't really like that kind of attention. Like, I like my things to be smaller and more high quality and more, you know, just has more depth. But what I will say is I'm definitely a curator. I put on my filmmaking editor's hat and I take all these artists that I work with who I know, because a lot of them I've been working with for 10, 15 years. And I construct an experience or a journey for whatever event or whatever partner I'm working with. So for example, I was a juror for a UN film festival, the SDGs in Action Film Festival. And I asked the guy who I was working with, like, so have you decided what order you're going to show the films that we were going to screen at this event? And he said, yes, I decided I'm going to just show them alphabetically, in alphabetical order. And I was like, that's not a good idea. So I rearranged them. And he said, well, how did you come up with this sequence? And I said, well, I took all 6 films and I made them into one story. So if you know anything about narrative arc, figure out how to construct or curate an experience that is not just put this here, do this here, oh, this looks good here. It's actually understanding sort of the bigger picture, looking at the creative assets, so to speak, that you have to work with, and knowing how to put them together that creates a journey. It's the same sort of thing. Like you could take 3 musicians, and depending on where you place them and how you order them, could be very successful or it can fail. And if you're not accustomed to being a storyteller or an event producer or somebody that understands how to construct events, you don't know. How would you know? So I like to say I'm a curator, not an influencer.
But you are a curator, and as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, it's important to have a common language. So as I understand, you are like the curator also of different languages from different parts of the societies, and you define yourself as a responsible storyteller. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure. So the reason why I even became a filmmaker had to do with an experience I had in Kosovo, a term that is often used called poverty porn, which is this idea that we tell emotionally exploitative stories in order to fundraise or to do campaigns or whatnot. And that can be really, that can strip the dignity of the people who you're telling stories about. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out, I knew it was not right, but I didn't know what the solution was. Like, we can all say poverty porn is bad, but I couldn't find the solution of, well, how do I tell global health stories responsibly? And I've figured it out for myself. I almost quit my job like 3 times. I couldn't find the point where I felt like I was doing this responsibly while still, delivering content that was necessary for my contracts, because I'm also getting paid. So I have come up with my own sort of process and philosophy about storytelling, and I do workshops to kind of illustrate how to do responsible storytelling. We have to address some of the difficult things, because you cannot tell a story about maternal health, like obstetric fistula, without showing women who are suffering with obstetric fistula. Otherwise, it's just like a, poor people smiling campaign. That's not going to work. But the order that you tell the story, how you tell the story, whose voices you amplify, who's the hero of the story, all of these things can shift the narrative and change the narrative from one that feels exploitative to one that is more inspiring.
And what kind of stories, what kind of messages are we going to see? Are we going to need the next month?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, stories that start immediately with trauma, where they want to show you the worst of the worst to pull you in to this story. It's like, oh, like, okay, I want to see it, but I don't really want to see it. So like, a story about COVID-19 that starts in an ICU where a person dies might be a typical film I would see, in the global health community. But what if we learned about the doctor, and we got to know about the doctor first, who's a loving mother, who sacrificed a lot to become a doctor, who excels at her job in the ICU? That is just a different way of telling the same story. It's character driven. It's not one dimensional. It's not showing a doctor as only a frontline healthcare worker that has to watch people die. It's like we get to know somebody in a more holistic, comprehensive way, so that when they get to that point, we feel more for what she's going through than we are being like for shock value, if that makes sense. And I also think telling stories that are less like pitiful, like, like charitable, oh, we go into this community and save these people because without us, they would die or they would suffer, versus, and that's sort of, I think, a charity story that leads to pity. And nobody wants pity, I don't think. But you change that story to a justice story, like, okay, so this community isn't getting food delivered on a regular basis, and the consequence of that is the people are suffering. So how do we address the problem? Like, the problem is the problem, the people aren't the problem. So why is food not getting to this community? And looking at that aspect of the story. So there's a lot of devices. There's actually a great resource I use a lot in my workshops called the Charter for Storytelling Rights. And it's a really good guideline in terms of, it's set up like the UN Charter, like people whose stories are being told, do they have a right in how they are presented, how their stories are presented? And we as storytellers in the global health and development community, I think there's so much we can do to become better storytellers. And then lastly, I'll just say, I think that there's a difference between the sort of messaging and campaigning storytelling versus the like craft of storytelling, which for a lot of really good storytellers takes years to master. So it's not just stringing together kind of sound bites and this or whatever. It's like, how do you look at a story, a narrative arc? How do you build conflict? Who's your protagonist? Who's your antagonist? What's the plot? What's the theme? And all of these things, even though they seem really like far out there, I think, you know, I work with Pixar in a Box, for example, and we do a really basic workshop with people who want to do storytelling in this community. If they can at least get their mind around sort of different storytelling devices and techniques, it may alter the way that we see stories. I curate the Women Deliver Film Festival, and I can tell you there's a lot of really unethical films. There's a lot of great films, but there's still this like, ta-da, did you know that 350,000 women around the world, it's like, it's not a story, it's a message.
Okay, we sort of come close to the end of this first section now. So let me ask you a final question this session, and that is, if people wanted to get in touch with you, they wanted to exhibit their art or whatever, what do they do?
So if you go to create2030.org, there is a page that's dedicated to the solidarity shows, and it has links of where you can submit. It has some of the artwork, has some of the artists. I have a newsletter. This is one of many initiatives. I'm doing an online arts and SDGs festival next week. So if you are either one, you don't have to be an artist or want to be an artist or a storyteller. If you're just interested as a global health professional, as a communication specialist, you can join and just see, that's my angle, but it's, you know, it's one of many angles that people can explore. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for doing this interview. That's great. And it's very inspiring. And I'm sure lots of people will be really, really interested in what you said. And I'm sure lots of people will want to get involved. So we'll end this session of the interview now.